The silence of the night was deafening as I sat in our living room, my fingers drumming nervously on the arm of the worn leather couch. The warm glow of the table lamp did little to dispel the growing unease in the pit of my stomach. I knew Tom would be home soon, and with his arrival would come the conversation I'd been dreading all day. Our modest two-story house in the suburbs of Boston had been my sanctuary for years. It was the only thing my parents left me when they passed away, a final gift that held countless memories within its walls. But lately, it had become a battleground, with Tom and I on opposite sides of an ever-widening chasm. The crunch of gravel under tires alerted me to Tom's return. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was to come. The front door opened, and I heard the familiar sound of keys dropping into the ceramic bowl by the entrance. "Sarah." Tom's voice called out, a hint of irritation already creeping in. "Where are you?" "In here," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. He appeared in the doorway, his once handsome face marred by a scowl. Tom had always been good-looking, with his dark hair and piercing blue eyes. It was part of what attracted me to him when we first met at a mutual friend's barbecue 5 years ago. But now, those same features seemed harsh and cold. "We need to talk," he said, not bothering with pleasantries. I nodded, gesturing for him to sit. He remained standing, looming over me like a storm cloud ready to burst. "My mother called again today," Tom began, his tone clipped. "She's not doing well, Sarah. The medical bills are piling up, and her house, well, you know it's falling apart." I did know. We'd had this conversation more times than I could count over the past few months. Tom's mother, Helen, had been diagnosed with a chronic illness, and her small pension wasn't enough to cover her mounting expenses. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly. "How can we help?" Tom's eyes flashed dangerously. "You know damn well how we can help. This house, Sarah. We need to sell it." And there it was, the crux of our problem laid bare once again. I felt my chest tighten, a mix of anger and fear coursing through me. "Tom, we've been over this. This house is all I have left of my family. I can't just give it up." "Can't or won't," he snapped. "My mother needs this, Sarah. Don't be so selfish." The word selfish hit me like a physical blow. I stood up, my own anger rising to match his. "Selfish? Is that what you think this is? This isn't just a house, Tom. It's my heritage, my memories. We can find another way to help your mother." But Tom wasn't listening. His face had turned an alarming shade of red, his fists clenching and unclenching at his sides. "There is no other way. You're just too stubborn to see it. God, why did I ever marry someone so self-centered?" His words stung, each one a knife twisting in my heart. I took a step back, trying to create some distance between us. "If that's how you feel, maybe we need to rethink this marriage," I said, my voice trembling despite my best efforts to keep it steady. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, without warning, Tom's hand shot out, grabbing my arm with bruising force. "You don't get to walk away from this," he growled, his face inches from mine. Fear, cold and sharp, sliced through me. This wasn't the man I married. This wasn't the Tom who used to bring me flowers just because, who would spend hours planning the perfect date night. When had he become this stranger, this man whose touch now made me flinch? "Let go of me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't. Instead, his grip tightened, and I saw something dark and ugly flash in his eyes. "You think you're so much better than everyone else, don't you? Living in your precious house, holding on to the past. Well, guess what? The past is dead, Sarah. Just like your parents." The words hit me like a physical blow, and I recoiled, trying to pull away. But Tom was stronger, his anger giving him a strength that terrified me. "Tom, please," I pleaded, tears beginning to form in my eyes. "You're hurting me." For a split second, I thought I saw a flicker of the old Tom in his eyes, a moment of realization at what he was doing. But it was gone as quickly as it appeared, replaced by a cold determination that sent chills down my spine. "Hurting you?" he sneered. "You don't know what hurt is." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Tom released my arm, only to rear back and strike out with his foot. Pain exploded in my leg as his kick connected, the force of it sending me crashing to the floor. I heard, more than felt, the sickening crack of bone. I lay there, stunned, the world around me blurring as shock set in. The pain in my leg was excruciating, unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Through the haze of agony, I heard Tom's voice, now eerily calm. "You think you'll be able to get home in that state? I don't think so. Good luck." His laughter, cruel and mocking, echoed through the room as he turned and walked away. I heard the front door slam, followed by the roar of his car engine as he drove off, leaving me alone on the cold, hard floor. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. I lay there, my mind oscillating between pain and disbelief. How had we come to this? When had the man I loved turned into this monster? Tears streamed down my face, but I refused to sob, refused to give him the satisfaction even in his absence. As the initial shock began to wear off, I became acutely aware of my surroundings. The house that had always been my safe haven now felt alien and threatening. The shadows on the walls seemed to grow, stretching towards me like accusing fingers. I needed help, that much was clear. But my phone was in my bag, on the other side of the room. It might as well have been miles away. Gritting my teeth against the pain, I began the agonizing process of dragging myself across the floor. Each movement sent waves of agony through my leg, but I pressed on. I had to reach the phone. I had to get help. As I inched my way across the room, leaving a trail of tears and sweat in my wake, a new emotion began to take root alongside the pain and fear: determination. This would be the last time Tom ever laid a hand on me. The last time he made me feel small, insignificant, or trapped. I didn't know how yet, but I knew with absolute certainty that this was a turning point. From this moment on, everything would change. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, my fingers closed around my bag. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking as I dialed 911. As I waited for the operator to answer, I made a silent vow to myself. I would survive this. I would heal, I would grow stronger, and I would never, ever allow anyone to treat me this way again. The night that had started with a betrayal would end with a promise to myself, to the strong, independent woman I knew I could be. As I heard the distant wail of sirens approaching, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. This was the end of one chapter, but it was also the beginning of something new. Something powerful. Something unbreakable. Little did I know then, as I lay on the floor of what had once been my sanctuary, that this night would be the catalyst for a transformation beyond anything I could have imagined. The road ahead would be long and difficult, but it would lead me to discover a strength I never knew I possessed. The harsh fluorescent lights of the emergency room made everything look stark and unreal. I lay on the hospital bed, my leg throbbing despite the painkillers coursing through my system. The doctor's words echoed in my mind: "Your tibia is fractured. It's going to take time to heal." Time. It seemed both an enemy and a friend at that moment. An enemy because I knew the road to recovery would be long and arduous. A friend because it meant distance from that terrible night, from Tom, from the life I now realized had been slowly suffocating me. As I lay there, surrounded by the beeping of machines and the hushed voices of nurses, I felt utterly alone. But strangely, that loneliness wasn't as terrifying as I thought it would be. It felt like possibility. The next few days in the hospital were a blur of tests, consultations, and fitful sleep. But as the fog of shock began to lift, I found myself thinking more clearly than I had in years. The fairy tale I had built around my marriage crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. I remembered the early days with Tom, the laughter, the shared dreams, the feeling that we could conquer the world together. When had that changed? It hadn't been overnight, I realized. It had been a slow erosion, like water wearing away at a rock. A snide comment here, a dismissive gesture there. The way he'd roll his eyes when I talked about my work at the local art gallery. The constant pressure to conform to his idea of what a wife should be. And his mother, Helen. I thought about her with a mixture of pity and resentment. She had never approved of me, always hinting that Tom could have done better. Now I wondered if she had been right, but for all the wrong reasons. Tom deserved exactly what he got, a mirror of his own cruelty. On the third day of my hospital stay, a soft knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. A woman entered, her kind face framed by salt and pepper hair. "Sarah," she said gently. "I'm Linda, one of the hospital's social workers. Do you feel up to a chat?" I nodded, grateful for the company and the distraction from my swirling thoughts. Linda pulled up a chair and sat beside my bed. Her presence was comforting, like a warm blanket on a cold day. "Sarah, I've been briefed on your situation," she began, her voice filled with compassion but free from pity. "I want you to know that what happened to you is not your fault. No one deserves to be treated that way, especially not by someone who's supposed to love and protect them." Her words, simple as they were, broke something open inside me. Tears that I had been holding back for days, no, years, began to fall. Linda didn't try to stop them or offer empty platitudes. She simply sat with me, a silent witness to my pain and my strength. When the tears finally subsided, I felt different. Lighter, somehow. As if I'd shed not just tears, but the weight of expectations and fears that had been holding me down. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice hoarse. Linda smiled. "You're stronger than you know, Sarah. And you're not alone. There are resources available to help you through this. Legal aid, counseling, support groups. Whatever you need." As she spoke, a plan began to form in my mind. It was hazy at first, like a distant mountain shrouded in mist. But with each passing moment, it became clearer, more defined. "Linda," I said, my voice stronger now, "I need to speak with a lawyer." She nodded, unsurprised. "Of course. I can put you in touch with someone who specializes in cases like yours." The next day, I met with Rachel, a sharp-eyed attorney with a no-nonsense attitude that I immediately appreciated. She listened intently as I recounted my story, her pen flying across her notepad. "All right, Sarah," she said when I finished. "Here's what we're going to do. First, we're filing for a restraining order against Tom. Then, we're initiating divorce proceedings. The house is yours, inherited from your parents, correct?" I nodded. "Good. We'll make sure it stays that way. Now, about the physical assault, we can press charges if you want to. It's entirely your decision." The thought of facing Tom in court made my stomach churn, but I forced myself to consider it objectively. What would happen if we did? Rachel's eyes gleamed with a fierce protectiveness that made me glad she was on my side. Best case scenario? He'd face jail time. At the very least, it would create a legal record of his actions, which could be crucial if he ever tries anything like this again. I took a deep breath. Let's do it. The next weeks were a whirlwind of legal paperwork, physical therapy, and emotional upheaval. Tom tried to contact me several times, his messages oscillating between rage and false remorse. Each one I forwarded to Rachel without response, building our case brick by brick. As my body slowly healed, I felt my spirit strengthening as well. The woman who had cowered in fear that night was fading away, replaced by someone new. Someone who refused to be a victim. It was during one of my physical therapy sessions that I had an epiphany. I was working with Mike, my therapist, struggling to put weight on my healing leg. "Come on, Sarah," Mike encouraged. "You've got this. One more step." Gritting my teeth against the pain, I took that step. And another. And another. "Look at you go," Mike cheered. "You're a regular comeback kid." As I stood there, sweating and triumphant, I realized that this journey, this painful, difficult journey, was about more than just healing my body. It was about reclaiming my life, my identity, my power. That night, lying in my hospital bed, I made a decision. The house that Tom had so desperately wanted to take from me, it was time to let it go. Not because he wanted it, but because I needed a fresh start. The next morning, I called a real estate agent. "I want to sell my house," I told her. "And I want to look at commercial properties." "Commercial properties?" she asked, surprised. "What did you have in mind?" I smiled, feeling a surge of excitement for the first time in months. "I'm going to open an art gallery. A place for new voices, for survivors, for anyone who needs a space to be heard." As I hung up the phone, I felt a sense of purpose wash over me. The road ahead would be challenging, I knew that. But for the first time in a long time, I was looking forward to the journey. The day I was discharged from the hospital was bright and clear, the Boston sky a brilliant blue. As I stood outside, leaning on my crutches, I took a deep breath of fresh air. It felt like my first real breath in years. Linda was there to see me off. "Remember," she said, giving me a gentle hug, "you're not alone. You have support. Use it." I nodded, grateful beyond words for her kindness. "I will," I promised. As the taxi pulled up to take me to my new apartment, a small, sunny place I'd rented sight unseen, eager to be out of the house that held so many painful memories, I felt a mix of emotions. Fear, yes. Uncertainty, definitely. But overwhelmingly, I felt hope. I was under no illusions that the path ahead would be easy. I still had a long way to go in my physical recovery. The legal battles with Tom were just beginning. And the challenge of starting a new business from scratch was daunting, to say the least. But as I settled into the taxi, I caught a glimpse of myself in the rearview mirror. The woman looking back at me was different from the one who had entered the hospital weeks ago. Her eyes were clearer, her jaw set with determination. She was a survivor, a fighter, a phoenix rising from the ashes of her old life. "Where to?" the taxi driver asked. I smiled, feeling the weight of possibility in my answer. "To the future," I said. And as we pulled away from the hospital, I didn't look back. The past was behind me now. Ahead lay a new chapter, one that I would write on my own terms. The taxi merged into the Boston traffic, carrying me towards an uncertain but exciting future. I was ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, armed with a newfound strength and the knowledge that I was capable of far more than I had ever imagined. This was just the beginning of my journey, and for the first time in a long time, I couldn't wait to see where it would lead. The early morning sun streamed through the windows of my new apartment, casting a warm glow on the stack of papers spread across my small dining table. I sat there, nursing a cup of coffee, my eyes scanning the documents that represented my past, present, and future. It had been 2 months since I left the hospital, and every day had been a step towards reclaiming my life. The physical therapy was grueling, but I was making progress. I could now walk without crutches, though a slight limp remained a reminder of that fateful night that had changed everything. As I sorted through the papers, I came across a folder I hadn't opened in years. It contained documents about a small family business my parents had left me, a modest printing shop that I had all but forgotten about. I had always assumed it was just a struggling small business, not worth my time or attention. How wrong I had been. Curious, I began to dig deeper. As I pored over the financial statements and business records, a picture began to emerge, one of untapped potential and overlooked opportunities. The printing shop, tucked away in a bustling corner of Cambridge, had been breaking even for years, but with the right management and a fresh perspective, it could be so much more. I reached for my phone, my fingers hovering over the keypad for a moment before I made the call. "Hello, Rachel? It's Sarah. I need your help with something." Rachel, my lawyer, had become more than just a legal advisor over the past months. She had been a rock, guiding me through the turbulent waters of divorce proceedings and restraining orders. Now, I needed her expertise for a different kind of battle. "What's on your mind, Sarah?" she asked, her voice warm and encouraging. "I've discovered something about my family's business," I began, excitement creeping into my voice. I think I want to revive it. Transform it. But I'm going to need help." Rachel's enthusiasm matched my own. "That's fantastic, Sarah. I know just the people who can help. Let me make some calls." Over the next few weeks, my small apartment became a hub of activity. Rachel introduced me to Mark, a sharp-eyed business consultant, and Lena, a whiz with marketing and social media. Together, we pored over spreadsheets, brainstormed ideas, and began to shape a vision for the future. The printing shop, we decided, would be more than just a place for business cards and flyers. We would expand into custom art prints, collaborating with local artists to create unique, limited edition pieces. It was a perfect blend of my love for art and my newfound entrepreneurial spirit. As we worked, I felt a fire igniting within me that I hadn't felt in years. This was more than just a business venture, it was a reclamation of my family's legacy, a way to honor my parents' memory while forging my own path. But even as I threw myself into this new project, the shadows of the past weren't far behind. Tom, true to form, wasn't going to let me go without a fight. His messages, once a flood of alternating rage and remorse, had dwindled to a steady trickle of manipulative pleas. "Sarah, please," his latest voicemail begged, "can't we just talk about this? I've changed, I swear. I miss you. I need you." I deleted the message without a second thought, a grim smile on my face. The old Sarah might have wavered, might have been tempted to give him another chance. But that Sarah was gone. In her place stood a woman who knew her worth, who refused to be diminished or controlled ever again. With each passing day, my resolve strengthened. I threw myself into the work of transforming the printing shop, channeling all my energy into this new endeavor. We repainted the storefront, a bright, inviting blue that seemed to beckon passers-by. Inside, we cleared out the outdated equipment, replacing it with state-of-the-art printers capable of producing gallery-quality prints. The day we reopened the shop, now christened Phoenix Prints, was one of the proudest moments of my life. As I stood behind the counter, greeting our first customers, I felt a sense of accomplishment that went beyond mere business success. This was a testament to my resilience, a physical manifestation of my journey from victim to victor. But even as I reveled in this new chapter of my life, I knew the story wasn't over. Tom's persistent attempts to contact me were a constant reminder that the past wasn't fully behind me. It was Lena who finally convinced me to take action. "Sarah," she said one evening as we were closing up the shop, "you can't keep living with this cloud hanging over you. You need to end this, once and for all." She was right, of course. The next day, I met with Rachel to discuss our options. "We've got more than enough evidence for a solid case," Rachel assured me. "His history of emotional abuse, the physical assault, the financial manipulation, we can bury him, Sarah." I took a deep breath, weighing the decision. Part of me wanted to just move on, to leave Tom and all the pain he represented in the past. But another part, a stronger part, knew that I owed it to myself and to other women who might fall prey to men like Tom to see this through. "Let's do it," I said, my voice firm with resolve. The legal proceedings that followed were grueling. Reliving the abuse, facing Tom across the courtroom, it took every ounce of strength I had. But with each passing day, I felt my power growing. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for every person who had ever felt trapped, powerless, or alone. As the case progressed, something unexpected happened. Women began to reach out to me, friends of friends, acquaintances, even strangers who had heard about the case. They shared their own stories of abuse and survival, thanking me for having the courage to stand up and fight back. It was during this time that the idea for the art gallery began to take shape. What if we could create a space where these stories could be told? Where survivors could find their voice through art? The more I thought about it, the more right it felt. I shared the idea with my team, and their enthusiasm was immediate and unanimous. We began to plan, to dream, to envision a space that would be more than just a gallery. It would be a sanctuary, a place of healing and empowerment. As the legal battle with Tom drew to a close, I felt a sense of closure I hadn't expected. The court ruled in my favor, granting me not just a divorce but also a permanent restraining order against Tom. His attempts to claim a share of the business were summarily dismissed. I walked out of that courtroom not as a victim, but as a survivor, strong, resilient, and ready to take on the world. The months that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Phoenix Prints was thriving, its unique blend of traditional printing services and artistic collaborations striking a chord with the Cambridge community. We began to scout locations for the gallery, eventually settling on a beautiful old building just a few blocks from Harvard Square. As I stood in the empty space that would soon become Rising Phoenix Gallery, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me here to a place of strength, purpose, and hope. I thought about the woman I had been just a year ago, trapped in a toxic marriage, doubting her own worth, afraid to dream. And I thought about the woman I was now, a business owner, an advocate, a phoenix risen from the ashes of her old life. The road ahead was still long, I knew. Opening the gallery would bring its own challenges, and I had no illusions about the difficulty of the task we were undertaking. But as I stood there, sunlight streaming through the dusty windows of my future gallery, I felt ready. Ready to face whatever came next, ready to continue growing, learning, and fighting. This was more than just a new business venture. It was a promise to myself, to the women who had reached out to me, to anyone who had ever felt powerless or alone. A promise that there is always hope, always a way forward, always the possibility of rising from the ashes and soaring. As I locked up the empty gallery space, a smile played on my lips. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities, new battles to fight. And I was ready for all of it. The phoenix had risen, and she was ready to fly. The gentle hum of the air conditioning was a soothing backdrop as I sat at my desk, poring over the latest financial reports. The office, with its sleek furniture and large windows overlooking the bustling streets of Cambridge, still felt a bit surreal. Just over a year ago, I was trapped in an abusive marriage, and now here I was, CEO of Phoenix Enterprises, a thriving company that had grown from the humble printing shop my parents left me. A knock on the door interrupted my thoughts. "Come in," I called, looking up from the papers strewn across my desk. My assistant, Jenny, poked her head in. "Ms. Walker, your 2 o'clock appointment is here. Mr. Johnson from Innovative Tech Solutions." I nodded, straightening my blazer as I stood. "Thank you, Jenny. Please show him in." As I waited for my visitor, I couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Phoenix Enterprises had come a long way in a short time. We'd expanded beyond printing into digital design and marketing, and our art gallery, Rising Phoenix, had become a beacon for emerging artists in the Boston area. Each success felt like a personal victory, a step further away from the woman I used to be. The door opened, and I plastered on my best professional smile, ready to greet Mr. Johnson. But as the man stepped into my office, the smile froze on my face. My heart began to race, and for a moment, I was transported back to that terrible night when my world had shattered. Standing before me, looking equally shocked, was Tom. Time seemed to stand still as we stared at each other. Tom looked older, more worn. His once impeccable suit hung a little loose on his frame, and there were new lines around his eyes. But it was unmistakably him, the man who had once been my husband, my abuser, my worst nightmare. I was the first to break the silence. "Mr. Johnson, I presume?" My voice was steady, betraying none of the turmoil I felt inside. Tom seemed to snap out of his shock. "Sarah, I had no idea. The meeting was set up by my assistant. If I had known." "Please, have a seat," I interrupted, gesturing to the chair across from my desk. I wasn't about to let him see how much his presence affected me. "I understand you're here to discuss a potential partnership between our companies." Tom nodded, lowering himself into the chair. His eyes darted around the office, taking in the awards on the walls, the view from the windows, the clear signs of success that surrounded us. "Yes, that's right. Innovative Tech Solutions has developed some new software that we think would integrate well with your design services." As he launched into his pitch, I found myself marveling at the strange turns life could take. Here was Tom, the man who had once made me feel small and worthless, now sitting in my office, trying to sell me on a business partnership. The irony was almost laughable. I listened to his proposal with half an ear, my mind racing. Part of me wanted to throw him out, to tell him exactly what I thought of him and his company. But another part, the part that had grown and learned and become stronger, knew that this was an opportunity. An opportunity to show Tom and myself just how far I had come. When Tom finished speaking, I leaned back in my chair, studying him. "That's an interesting proposal, Mr. Johnson. However, I have some concerns about the viability of your software in our current infrastructure." I began to ask pointed questions about his product, its development, its market performance. With each question, I saw Tom grow more flustered. This wasn't the Sarah he knew, the woman who had deferred to his judgment, who had doubted her own intelligence and capability. As our meeting wore on, I could see the realization dawning in Tom's eyes. He was no longer in control here. He was in my world now, and in this world, I was the one with the power. Finally, after an hour of intense discussion, I sat back. "Thank you for your time, Mr. Johnson. I'll have my team review your proposal and get back to you with our decision." Tom stood, looking somewhat dazed. Of course. Thank you for considering us, Sarah, I mean, Ms. Walker. As he turned to leave, I called out, "Oh, and Tom?" He turned back, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "I think it's best if we keep our future communications through our respective teams. I'm sure you understand." The hope in his eyes died, replaced by a mix of emotions I couldn't quite decipher. Anger, regret, shame. Without another word, he nodded and left the office. As the door closed behind him, I let out a long, shaky breath. My hands were trembling, and I could feel tears pricking at the corners of my eyes. But these weren't tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of relief, of pride, of a catharsis I hadn't known I needed. I had faced my abuser on my own terms, in my own arena. And I had won. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, reviewing contracts, meeting with my team, planning our next moves. But in quiet moments, my mind kept drifting back to that meeting with Tom. As evening fell and the office emptied, I found myself alone, staring out at the twinkling lights of Cambridge. The woman reflected in the window looked strong, confident, successful. But I knew the truth, that strength had been hard-won, that confidence had been built on the ashes of self-doubt, that success had come from countless hours of work and perseverance. My phone buzzed, pulling me from my reverie. It was a text from Rachel, my lawyer and now close friend. "Heard you had an unexpected visitor today. You okay?" I smiled, touched by her concern. "I'm more than okay," I typed back. "I'm fantastic." And I meant it. Seeing Tom had been a shock, but it had also been a measuring stick. It showed me just how far I had come, how much I had grown. The Sarah who had cowered before Tom was gone. In her place stood a woman who could face her fears head-on and emerge victorious. As I gathered my things to head home, my eye caught on a small framed quote on my desk. It was something I had come across during my darkest days, words that had given me hope when I needed it most. "She made broken look beautiful and strong look invincible. She walked with the universe on her shoulders and made it look like a pair of wings." Those words had once been an aspiration. Now, they felt like a description. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Word of my encounter with Tom seemed to spread through the business community, and suddenly, Phoenix Enterprises was in the spotlight. Investors were calling, wanting to be part of our success story. Other survivors reached out, inspired by my journey from victim to CEO. I used this newfound attention to further our mission. We launched a mentorship program for women leaving abusive situations, offering job training and placement services. Rising Phoenix Gallery hosted an exhibition featuring art by survivors, with proceeds going to local women's shelters. Through it all, I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop. For Tom to retaliate, to try to undermine me or the company. But as days turned into weeks, I realized something important. I wasn't afraid anymore. Whatever Tom might do, I knew I could handle it. I had faced my worst fears and come out stronger. One evening, as I was locking up the gallery after a successful event, I ran into an old friend from my pre-Tom days. "Sarah," she exclaimed, her eyes wide with surprise. "Is that really you?" I smiled, extending my hand. "It is. It's good to see you, Lisa." We chatted for a few minutes, catching up on the years that had passed. As we were about to part ways, Lisa shook her head in wonder. "You know, Sarah, you're not at all how I remember you. You seem so different." I thought about her words as I walked home that night. Different. Yes, I supposed I was different. The old Sarah had been broken, beaten down by life and by Tom. But like a phoenix, I had risen from those ashes. Stronger, wiser, more resilient. As I climbed the steps to my apartment, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The journey had been hard, filled with pain and struggle. But it had led me here, to a life I could be proud of, to a version of myself I could love and respect. I was different. And that difference was my greatest strength. The morning after my unexpected encounter with Tom, I woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. As I sipped my coffee and watched the sun rise over the Charles River, I knew that simply moving on wasn't enough. It was time to ensure that Tom could never hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. I picked up my phone and dialed Rachel's number. Rachel? It's Sarah. I need your help with something important. An hour later, I was sitting in Rachel's office, laying out my plan. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concentration. When I finished speaking, she leaned back in her chair, a mix of admiration and concern in her eyes. Sarah, are you sure about this? It's a bold move, and it could backfire. I nodded, my resolve unwavering. I'm sure, Rachel. It's not just about me anymore. It's about all the other women out there who might fall victim to men like Tom. We have the power to make a difference, and I think it's time we used it. Rachel's expression softened, and she reached across the desk to squeeze my hand. All right, then. Let's do this. Over the next few weeks, we set our plan in motion. The first step was to gather evidence. We hired a team of private investigators to dig into Tom's past and present. It wasn't about finding dirt for the sake of revenge, it was about uncovering the truth and protecting potential victims. As the investigators worked, I threw myself into running Phoenix Enterprises with renewed vigor. We launched new initiatives, expanded our reach, and continued to support survivors through our various programs. On the surface, it was business as usual. But beneath it all, a storm was brewing. The investigators' reports started trickling in, and each one made my blood run cold. Tom's history of abuse wasn't limited to our marriage. There were other women, other victims who had been too afraid to speak out. Financial records revealed a pattern of manipulation and control that extended far beyond personal relationships and into his business dealings. Armed with this information, we moved to the next phase of our plan. Rachel filed a civil suit against Tom, citing not just the abuse I had suffered, but also the harm he had caused to others. We also reported his business irregularities to the relevant authorities. The day the news broke, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, fellow business leaders, and survivors all wanted to hear my story. I gave a single press conference, standing tall in front of a sea of flashing cameras. I'm not here to seek revenge, I said, my voice steady and clear. I'm here to seek justice, not just for myself, but for all those who have suffered in silence. It's time to break that silence and hold abusers accountable for their actions. The fallout was immediate and far-reaching. Tom's company's stock plummeted as investors scrambled to distance themselves from the scandal. Former employees came forward with their own stories of mistreatment and harassment. The man who had once seemed untouchable was now watching his empire crumble around him. Through it all, I maintained a calm, professional demeanor. This wasn't about gloating or celebrating Tom's downfall. It was about creating change, about sending a message that abuse and manipulation would not be tolerated. As the legal proceedings dragged on, I received a call from an unexpected source. It was Helen, Tom's mother. My heart raced as I answered the phone, unsure of what to expect. Sarah. Her voice sounded older, more fragile than I remembered. I owe you an apology. I listened in stunned silence as Helen poured out her heart. She had always known about Tom's behavior, she admitted. She had enabled him, made excuses for him, convinced herself that he would change. Now, faced with the full extent of his actions, she was grappling with her own guilt and complicity. I'm so sorry, Sarah, she said, her voice breaking. I should have helped you. I should have stopped him. As I hung up the phone, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Helen's apology couldn't undo the pain of the past, but it was a step towards healing. It was a reminder that change was possible, that even those who had once been against me could come to see the truth. The lawsuit dragged on for months, each day bringing new revelations and challenges. There were moments when I wanted to give up, when the stress and scrutiny became almost too much to bear. But every time I felt like faltering, I reminded myself of why I was doing this. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about every person who had ever felt trapped, powerless, or alone. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we received the verdict. The court ruled in our favor, ordering Tom to pay substantial damages not just to me, but to a fund set up to support domestic abuse survivors. Moreover, he was barred from holding any executive positions in companies for the next decade. As I stood on the courthouse steps after the verdict was announced, I felt a complex mix of emotions. There was relief, certainly, and a sense of justice served. But there was also a sadness for the young, naive woman I had once been, who had believed in Tom's lies and endured his abuse. And there was determination, a fierce resolve to use this victory as a springboard for even greater change. I spoke briefly to the gathered press, my words carefully chosen. Today's verdict is not the end, but a beginning. It's a call to action for all of us to stand up against abuse in all its forms. No one should have to suffer in silence. No one should feel alone. In the weeks that followed, I was inundated with messages from survivors around the country. They shared their stories, their struggles, their triumphs. Each message reinforced my conviction that we were on the right path. We used the momentum from the trial to launch new initiatives at Phoenix Enterprises. We partnered with domestic violence shelters to provide job training and employment opportunities for survivors. We expanded our art therapy programs at Rising Phoenix Gallery. And we started a foundation to provide legal aid to those seeking to escape abusive situations. Tom, meanwhile, seemed to vanish from public life. I heard through the grapevine that he had moved out of state, his reputation in tatters. Part of me hoped that he was using this time for genuine self-reflection and change, but I knew better than to hold my breath. One evening, as I was working late in my office, I received an email that made my heart skip a beat. It was from Tom. For a moment, my finger hovered over the delete button. But curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The message was short, just a few lines. Tom wrote that he was in therapy, trying to understand and change his behavior. He acknowledged the pain he had caused and said he was truly sorry. He didn't ask for forgiveness or try to justify his actions. He simply wanted me to know that he was trying to be better. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen long after I'd finished reading. I didn't respond to the email, I didn't need to. Tom's journey was his own now, separate from mine. But I saved the message, a reminder of how far we'd both come. As I looked out over the city lights, I reflected on the long, difficult road that had led me here. The revenge I had sought wasn't about destroying Tom, it was about reclaiming my power, about turning my pain into purpose. It was about ensuring that other women wouldn't have to endure what I had. In the end, the best revenge wasn't served cold at all. It was served through warmth, the warmth of compassion for other survivors, the warmth of creating a community of support, the warmth of using my experiences to light the way for others. I smiled to myself, feeling a deep sense of peace. The Sarah who had once been broken by Tom's abuse was gone. In her place stood a woman who had not just survived, but thrived, a woman who had turned her pain into power, her struggles into strength. And that, I realized, was the sweetest revenge of all. The morning of the court's final ruling dawned bright and clear. I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, adjusting my suit and taking deep breaths to calm my nerves. Today was the day that would officially close this chapter of my life, the day when all the pain, struggle, and hard work would culminate in a judge's decision. As I made my way to the courthouse, the streets of Boston were already bustling with morning commuters. I couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since that fateful night when Tom had left me broken on our living room floor. The woman walking confidently down the sidewalk in her power suit was a far cry from the battered, frightened person I had been. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters and cameras. I saw Rachel waiting for me at the top, her face a mask of professional calm. As I approached, she gave me a reassuring smile. "Ready?" she asked, her hand on my arm. I nodded, squaring my shoulders. "More than ready." Inside, the courtroom was a sea of murmuring voices and rustling papers. I took my seat, my eyes briefly meeting Tom's across the room. He looked pale and drawn, a shadow of the man who had once towered over me with his anger and control. As the judge entered and the room fell silent, I felt a strange sense of peace wash over me. Whatever happened today, I knew that I had already won the most important battle, the one within myself. The judge's voice rang out clear and firm as he delivered his ruling. Tom was found guilty on all counts: domestic abuse, financial fraud, and corporate misconduct. The sentence was harsh: significant jail time, hefty fines, and a lifetime ban from holding any executive positions in companies. As the gavel came down, Finalizing the decision, I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. It was over. Really, truly over. Outside the courtroom, I faced the waiting press. Cameras flashed and microphones were thrust towards me as I stepped up to the podium. Today's ruling is not just a victory for me, I began, my voice steady and clear. It's a victory for every person who has ever felt trapped in an abusive situation, for every survivor who has struggled to reclaim their life and their dignity. But our work is far from over. This is just the beginning of a larger movement to ensure that no one has to suffer in silence, that no one has to face abuse alone. As I finished my statement and stepped away from the cameras, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Helen, Tom's mother, standing there with tears in her eyes. "Sarah," she said, her voice quavering. I don't know if I have the right to say this, but I'm proud of you. What you've done, not just for yourself but for others, it's remarkable." I felt a lump form in my throat as I looked at this woman who had once been complicit in my abuse. But I saw genuine remorse in her eyes, and I realized that my journey had impacted more lives than I had imagined. "Thank you, Helen," I said softly. "We all have the capacity to change and grow. Your support means a lot." The days that followed the trial were a whirlwind of activity. Phoenix Enterprises saw a surge of support, with new clients and partners eager to work with a company that stood for something beyond just profit. Rising Phoenix Gallery hosted a special exhibition featuring artwork by survivors of domestic abuse, with all proceeds going to support shelters and advocacy groups. But amidst all the public attention and business success, I found myself craving a moment of quiet reflection. One evening, I decided to take a walk along the Charles River, retracing the steps I had taken so many times during my recovery. As I walked, memories washed over me, the pain of those early days after leaving Tom, the struggle to rebuild my life, the triumphs and setbacks along the way. Each step I had taken, literal and figurative, had brought me to where I was now. I paused at a familiar bench, the same one where I had sat countless times, questioning my decisions and fearing for my future. Now, as I sat down, I felt only gratitude and a sense of accomplishment. My phone buzzed with a message from Lena, my marketing director at Phoenix Enterprises. "Sarah, you won't believe this. We've been nominated for a national award for our work with survivors. They want you to give the keynote speech at the ceremony." I smiled, feeling a warmth spread through my chest. This was why I had fought so hard, why I had pushed through the pain and fear. Not for awards or recognition, but for the chance to make a real difference in people's lives. As I made my way back home, I found myself thinking about the future. Phoenix Enterprises was thriving, the gallery was making waves in the art world, and our outreach programs were helping more survivors than I had ever dreamed possible. But I knew there was still so much more to do. I spent the next few weeks preparing for the award ceremony, pouring my heart into the speech I would give. On the night of the event, as I stood backstage waiting to be introduced, I felt a familiar flutter of nerves in my stomach. But this time, it was excitement rather than fear that made my heart race. As I stepped out onto the stage, the bright lights momentarily blinding me, I heard the applause of the audience. I saw faces, some familiar, some unknown, all united in their support for the cause we were fighting for. I took a deep breath and began to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, honored guests, fellow survivors," I said, my voice strong and clear. "I stand before you today not as a victim, but as a testament to the strength of the human spirit. My story is not unique. There are millions of people around the world who have faced abuse, who have felt trapped and hopeless. But I'm here to tell you that there is hope. There is a way out. And there is a beautiful, powerful life waiting on the other side of fear." As I continued my speech, I saw tears in the eyes of many in the audience. I saw nods of understanding, expressions of determination. I realized that in sharing my story, in standing tall and unashamed, I was giving others permission to do the same. The journey from victim to survivor is not an easy one, I concluded. It requires courage, support, and an unwavering belief in your own worth. But it is a journey worth taking. Because on the other side of that journey, you'll find not just survival, but triumph. You'll find not just healing, but the power to help others heal. You'll find not just your voice, but the strength to amplify the voices of those who are still struggling to be heard. As I finished speaking, the room erupted in a standing ovation. Through my tears, I saw Rachel and Lena in the front row, cheering and clapping. I saw other survivors I had met along my journey, standing tall and proud. And in that moment, I felt a sense of completion, of coming full circle. Later that night, as I stood on the balcony of my hotel room, looking out over the twinkling lights of the city, I reflected on the long, difficult road that had brought me here. The physical scars had long since healed, but the emotional ones, well, they had become a part of me, a testament to my resilience and strength. I thought about the frightened woman I had once been, the one who had believed she deserved the abuse, who had thought she was trapped with no way out. I wished I could reach back through time and tell her that she was stronger than she knew, that there was a whole world waiting for her on the other side of her fear. But then I realized, in a way, that's exactly what I was doing. By sharing my story, by standing tall and unashamed, I was reaching out to all the other women and men who were where I had once been. I was showing them that there was hope, that they too could rise from the ashes of abuse and build a life filled with purpose and joy. As I turned to go back inside, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the glass door. The woman looking back at me stood tall, her eyes clear and determined, her posture radiating confidence and strength. She was a survivor, a warrior, a phoenix risen from the ashes. And as I smiled at my reflection, I knew with absolute certainty that the best was yet to come. The journey wasn't over, it never really would be. But I was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. I was standing tall, and I would keep standing tall, not just for myself, but for all those who needed someone to show them the way. The future was bright, and I was ready to embrace it with open arms.